There are times when you're listening to someone's recollections and they're describing an experience, mentioning events through the years and what happened at some points of the story, and all of a sudden you have the idea that you misunderstood something that they said. Because you know that you absolutely heard the guy contradicting himself with what he said barely minutes ago. But you try to be polite and just give them a pass. Maybe they had a slip of the mind or something. No big deal. But what happens if you're like Kevin Spacey, who's on a literal tour of public relations, being interviewed by Dan Wootton, Lex Fridman, and now Piers Morgan, and in one of the most critical topics, which was how much of a relationship he had with Jeffrey Epstein, he contradicts himself in a way that is just scary. And we are not even talking about body language, even if you're going to see solid body language clues in this case. What you're going to hear comes right out of his mouth, which makes this analysis all the more useful for you to learn how to spot this kind of clues. So this is what we are about to see, and right from the first clip you see that he uses his body language and words to distance himself from Jeffrey Epstein and making sure to drive the point home that he did not know him. Watch.
In 2015, I started seeing reports online, things on my Twitter account that I had flown to this guy Jeffrey Epstein's island and I had abused young girls.
Now, let's get something out of the way here. Regardless of what is your opinion of Kevin Spacey, it's a fact that the guy has proven to be an amazing actor, two-time Oscar winner, and his performance up to 2017 in House of Cards was a blast. So that is a problem in terms of measuring authenticity and trustworthiness. Is he being real, as in the real him, or is he putting on an act? Or is he using his acting skills to his advantage? And these are legit questions. And of course, it is not enough to have actor in your job description, because for some reason, that's not a question that came up very often with Amber Heard, even she being an actress. And I wonder why. But going back to Spacey, I mentioned the acting thing because obviously when it comes to body language signals, body language is perhaps the most important tool of an actor, along with their voice. So yes, I have considered the possibility that his gestures, mannerisms, posture, voice inflections, and even pauses could be part of an act. That's why it's so important to include statement analysis to compare his own words at different points. And at this stage, he makes sure to say the words, "this guy, Jeffrey Epstein's island." His use of the words, "this guy," is to distance himself from the subject, like he had no awareness of or relationship with him. He makes sure to use the universal body language of signal of not knowing what's going on. He keeps his palms up, he shrugs a couple times, and he makes sure to frown. As in, I don't know why people were tweeting this kind of things, as I had no involvement. But it's better if we watch what he says immediately after, so pay close attention to his words.
And I was like, if you'd asked me in 2015, maybe even if you'd asked me in 2002, did I know a guy named Jeffrey Epstein? I probably would have said no. Well, of course, I have since learned who he is.
Okay, notice that he mentions two dates, 2002 and 2015. That is going to be important in a minute. But notice that he says that if someone had asked him in any of those dates who Jeffrey Epstein was, he probably would have said no. That probably is important because he's being extra careful of not being categorical. As in, no, I did not know Jeffrey Epstein at those points. He makes sure to keep his statement extra vague when he says, "Of course, I have since learned who he was." As in, now I know what kind of monster Epstein was, but he's actively avoiding saying, when did that happen? When did he realize who Epstein was? What he had done and what he was involved in? That, in fact, is a critical piece of information that would shoot down all these claims. All he had to say is, I found out about Jeffrey Epstein's true nature and business in X year, or in X circumstances. It was revealed to me because X person told me. Whatever. That would make it way easier to understand a before and after. The fact that he's withdrawing that from us means that this precise piece of information could be harmful for him, for Spacey. And why? Only he knows. But as I have told you many times, there's always a reason for people's behavior. But let's watch the following clip, because you're going to realize this is where the contradictions start. It's just a matter of paying attention to his words.
I have since been able to go back and find out that the airplane that we flew on for this humanitarian mission was owned by Jeffrey Epstein. And to then learn, oh, he was actually on some of those flights. And this Maxwell woman was on some of those flights.
So the first part was mostly okay. Maybe you're flying in someone's jet invited by President Clinton, and you might not have any idea of who is the owner of the plane, right? That is a possibility. So far, so good. But then he says that somehow he learned that Epstein was on some of those flights, and he means the private jet. Now, I am not an expert on private jets or private jet flights, but what I do know is that they are not that big. So it's pretty much common sense that if you're on a trip inside a private jet and there's the owner of the private jet in there with you, well, it's going to be really hard to believe that you never bumped into him, never knew he was the owner of the plane, and most important, his name. So Spacey implying that he found out that Epstein was actually on some of those flights, another vague word, is a bit of a stretch. Not to mention that he repeats the same speech patterns when talking about Ghislaine Maxwell. He says, "This Maxwell woman," to distance himself from her. Of course, the same way he did with Epstein, and also says some of those flights, as in an undetermined number of flights, which also makes you wonder, you suppose that if Epstein's jet took you somewhere, let's say from point A to point B, and both Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were on that trip, it would make sense that they would also share their trip back from point B to point A. It's not that Epstein and Maxwell were going to fly private first and take a commercial flight later somewhere else. It's possible, but unlikely. So it would have meant more time spent inside a private jet cabin. And speaking of Ghislaine Maxwell, there's this photo. And you remember that we talk about this a lot when I analyze the Prince Andrew interview. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because when you watch the following clip, there's something that definitely doesn't make sense.
So here's what I can tell you. This Maxwell woman, she was one of many people who sat down next to me in that throne room. I have no relationship with her. I had no relationship with him.
Okay, he claims that he had no relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. And he also repeats that he had no relationship with Epstein. But he said something else, and I quote, "She was one of many people who sat down next to me in that throne room," referring to, well, this picture. So I have a question for you, dear viewer. If many people sat down next to him at that moment, or if sitting at the British throne room seems to be no big deal, then why is precisely his picture with Ghislaine Maxwell the only one out there? Because there's absolutely zero photos of anyone else sitting next to him, or any celebrity or non-celebrity sitting on the British throne room for that matter. Don't you find this is at least a bit suspicious? Because you can bet one thing. One thing is for sure. If it was that easy for a celebrity to just go and sit down in the British throne room, Kim Kardashian would have done it long ago and brag about it with pictures on Instagram. I have zero doubts about that. Maybe she didn't have the right connections with Prince Andrew, and that's a sigh of relief for the British monarchy. But coming back to Spacey's body language, you see that he made that pause right before making that statement. Again, it's dramatic. It's to emphasize the fact that he claims to not having known who Ghislaine Maxwell was, even if they shared some of those several-hour private jet flights. It's not until you watch the following clip that he seems to realize he's making a mistake about these remarks. Watch.
I didn't know him. I've never spent any time with him. I was with the Clinton Foundation people. That's who I was with. Now, what I understand is that he didn't start to be investigated until 2005 by authorities in Florida.
So a couple of things in this previous clip. Again, doubling down in the fact that he didn't know Jeffrey Epstein. Also that he was with the Clinton Foundation, which, you can be doing both things at the same time. You can be inside the plane with the Clinton Foundation and Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at the same time. And that's when he makes that odd lip corner pull away from Morgan. It seems that he was regretting how his statement was going, as in more convoluted, including the Clinton Foundation, but at the same time lacking important facts, like when he found out about the true nature of their Sky host. That is also reflected in his body contracting on Morgan's side, as in the side of his body that was towards Piers Morgan. It became contracted, raising his right shoulder and leaning away in the opposite direction. There's also that glasses adjustment when he mentions that Jeffrey Epstein was not investigated until 2005. Again, trying to make it seem like when he took those trips on his private jet in 2002, he was completely unaware. I know that this might sound like I'm repeating myself over and over again, but I cannot stress enough the fact that he, once again, is failing to make statements that would clarify all this in a second. Did he take any flights after Epstein was convicted? Did he take any flights after his sudden realization of Epstein's nature? That way, he would answer all those questions in less than 30 seconds. That's why this seems so suspicious. Now, you know that when someone realizes that they are screwing things up, such as in this case, they will use deflection to try to bring the attention away of the blunder. And that's exactly what happens in the following clip. Let's see if you can spot the contrast between two statements. Watch.
I mean, he's not my friend. I'm not a confidant. I've never spent time with him. And interestingly, I will say this. I was very fortunate that President Clinton introduced me a lot of business leaders in London because he knew I was coming to the Old Vic.
Yeah, he's going one more time through all the talking points to prove that he never spent time with Epstein, which we already know it's an odd thing to say, given the shared private jet trips. But he instantly switches to talk about how good was the invitation from the Clinton Foundation to those trips. It is exactly like justifying those trips because you were doing good. It is justifying your actions because you were doing the right thing. But why do you need to justify yourself when you're claiming that you never knew who the guy was in the first place? That's what I mentioned sometimes when you see that people are trying to justify their behavior in more than one way, when a couple solid facts and answers will surface. Spacey is just trying to deflect his argument from Epstein to his humanitarian activities with the Clinton Foundation. But the next clip is just so you can check that he was really invested in that switch of topics.
And I developed relationships with Robert Earl, Pula Ladobovich, Robert Earl, a lot of wonderful people, Sir Richard Caring, people who supported the work that we did at the Old Vic and gave money to us.
And all this has brought us to the absolute bonkers statement that he's going to say in the following clip. This is about to leave you scratching your head because it's when he flat out contradicts himself.
Do you know who I never asked for anything? Was Jeffrey Epstein. I didn't want to be around this guy because I felt he put the president at risk on that trip to South Africa because there were these young girls. And we were like, who is this guy? So I will say this.
There were young girls on those flights.
There were young girls on those flights.
So, yes, bonkers. He not only acknowledged that Jeffrey Epstein was with them on a trip to South Africa on Epstein plane, no less. But there were young girls with them. Why? And why didn't Spacey find it suspicious? We don't know because Morgan did not bother to ask that question. But hadn't Spacey up to this point repeated over and over again that he didn't know Epstein, didn't know who the guy was, that he was on some trips, and now claims to think he was putting Clinton at risk? I mean, that's acknowledging that you know that there's something fishy going on. So what is it? What is the real version of events? He didn't know who Epstein was, or he did know who he was and he was a risk for President Clinton? That's another question that Morgan did not ask. Did you ask President Clinton about the guy or why there were young girls on the plane? But no, because that is not an important question, I guess. But we get to the actual statement to set the record straight. Did he visit Epstein's island or not? So let's watch his answer in two parts. This one first.
But here's my point. There's a big difference between not remembering that I met some guy and some woman on a humanitarian trip where my focus was entirely on what we were there to do, and not remembering whether I went to somebody's island.
What he's doing is trying to use his upcoming denial of visiting Epstein's island with his supposed bad memory about meeting Epstein and Maxwell. In other words, minimizing whatever interaction he had with them. Laughable by any means. But then he says this.
So I never went to Jeffrey Epstein's island. I did not know him, and I never saw him or her after that morning at Buckingham Palace. He didn't even come to Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, it's strange to say I never saw Jeffrey Epstein again after that morning at Buckingham, but at the same time, Epstein didn't even come to Buckingham Palace. So maybe he went with him for fish and chips before the throne thing? Maybe that's why there are other pictures with Ghislaine Maxwell? His statement that he never went to Jeffrey Epstein's island doesn't have many body language hiccups. His voice remains in a clear tone. He's looking at Morgan directly. He's direct and categorical. Could he be telling the truth? His body language appears to confirm that, yes, he's telling the truth. But again, it's also all the other inconsistencies that surround those interactions with Epstein and Maxwell. How he tiptoes around certain subjects. He avoids giving precise details that would just clear him up on the spot of any involvement with them, and worse yet, Piers Morgan doesn't ask the important questions about those precise topics. I wouldn't be surprised that since this is a public relations tour, it will be arranged that certain questions cannot be asked. But then again, what's the point of giving an interview to clear up your name and rebuild your character in Kevin Spacey's own words if the interviewer is going to play it safe? Anyway, there are other parts of this interview that are also worth checking out, so I might be reviewing them in the following days. Meanwhile, I would love to know what you think about this in the comments. Remember to download my 100 free body language tips in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy. Much love and bliss.